my skill set. And some of the best way to teach anyone is to just force yourself to teach, which forces yourself to learn some content and understand what you're saying. So it's been a great journey. We've got some fun things to share today as well.
Oh, right on. Very cool. Well, why don't we get into it? So I created this as, if you just give me 1 second here, I've got two things going at the same time. So I named this the top 3 automation tools that you should look at in 2020. And I think right now with people at home, they might find themselves yearning to learn something new inside of quarantine. I'm learning guitar, but some people might be wanting to learn some automation tools. So what do you have for us today, John?
So I've got 2 things that I think there needs to be a foundational around every person that wants to automate. And then one tool that I don't think will be a surprise to many people, but an orchestration tool that allows you to take what you've learned from kind of that base foundational and move up right into that next level, allowing you to be able to contribute to other team members or just share information. We're gonna, the 3 tools, just in case. The first one is curl. Right. This sounds like it's old. It sounds not as shiny like a new toy. But the problem with that is understanding what all of those actual orchestration tools do, whether they're interacting with something via an API or whether they're getting health monitors. All of those under the hood use the same mechanisms that curl does. So I think that having that foundational is great. Right. Looking at that. The second is we still need to be confident in CLI integrations or CLI mechanisms to interact with tools. And I think what you'll see coming out through vendors or platform providers is that there's still this large push for CLI, right? And the mechanism that you can interact across multiple, let's say, products in one platform, that's crucial. So get used to still going into the CLI. If you're writing a Jenkins job, right? If you're writing Ansible jobs in this mechanism, you still, for many, many use cases, fall back to kicking into a CLI. And it allows you, right, to be able to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do within a module construct. So I'm going to highlight some of F5's CLI. And then, which is actually not just like the CLI in the box, but the CLI over all of the product portfolio. And then the last one is going to be Terraform. So I think if you had some good understanding, like this year, invest time in making sure you know how to use curl, know how to use CLI-based structures, and then move into Terraform, you'll definitely have a leg up coming out of, let's say, being trapped at home. So there's some good things that we can all work on.
Very cool. Yeah, all 3 things, especially I think the Terraform stuff has come up in a lot of conversations lately. I've noticed a lot more customers using that stuff. And so I think from an F5 perspective, it's great for the F5 engineers to get to know them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Right. The jump there, right? Like I love the history of things just in general, like the history of why auto manufacturing was so good, right? The history of why you only put so many, sides or objects on a plate when you're dishing it in a kitchen. But there's this fun nomenclature, and I did this for our user group. I think I used a cooking methodology when I was there. But it's just an interesting concept to me around how people structure things. And if you're going to jump right into the end, yes, it's great to get that plate of food, or yes, it's great to drive the Tesla, right? Yeah. But knowing all those pieces that come along the way, right, you have more of an appreciation for what you're doing in the end. And I think that's some of the stuff that I like people to focus on.
Yeah, totally. Cool. So for anybody who wants to play with any of this stuff too, if you have an F5, that's great. But if you want another F5 to use for your lab, you can email me and I'll just get you guys the eval keys. So I have a whole bunch cut already. Just ping me. There's no like big sign up or anything. Just ping me and say, hey, can I grab an eval key? And I'll get you one, and then you can run it wherever you need to run. Sorry about the dog here.
Next time they should be guests. Right?
Yeah. I'm sure my dog would love to be on this stream.
Anything I'm doing, of course, curl doesn't matter, right? That's just a CLI tool. You can use it against any big IP. The actual F5 CLI SDK, It works against any big IP as well. So like Boo said, if you have don't do anything in production you wouldn't do on a daily basis, but if you have a big IP, whether it is a trial license or a lab license or one that you own, you can do anything that I'm doing against those things right now. So awesome. There is no license for an API access. That's just not something Big IP ever wanted to implement. So, which is, I think, part of the freedom of why people like using it.
Yeah. And F5's had a long history with an API, right? Like we've had iControl SOAP forever.
We've had it for a long time, right? There was a period of time where it didn't exist. I mean, if you go back, 23 years, when it was just Linux commands, there wasn't probably one back then. But yeah, SOAP's been around for, if I had to venture a guess, somewhere like 12 to 13 years. So quite a bit of time. We made a transition, like SOAP still exists, but we did make a transition to be more industry standard, which is, I think, again, coming from someone that worked as a network engineer, the quickest way to like really, I'd say, piss off a network engineer is to make them learn an independent technology to interact with it for every tool that they have to interact with every day. So when we went to REST, it was a big transition because it wasn't just our, right? It wasn't our thing. REST isn't Big IP's thing. It's everybody's thing. And the fact that it was implemented means that the methodologies, again, why you use curl, why you use CLI tools, like that methodology gets to transition you as an individual from working on a Big IP to working on a Cisco box to working on some other thing, right? They all have this nomenclature that you can take from one device to another.
Totally. Cool.
All right. Let's start with some build outs. I'm going to share my screen, at least my terminal window to start with, and then we can see just some very simplistic stuff, and doesn't have to be much smarter than this. So I'm starting out with a Big IP that's essentially blank, because I want to be able to push what I'm doing right now into an actual CI/CD process. I need to know that the system is going to be set to a certain level, right? I need to know that it's ready to accept configuration. The first thing I need to know is that there's actually nothing there. So I'm going to walk through exactly through the steps in here. I'm not hiding anything. The first thing I'm going to do, this is my essentially my endpoint of where my service is going to live by the time we're done with these, 6 or 7 commands. And this allows me to make sure that there's something there or not there. So I want to see that there's nothing there, right? So it refuses. There's nothing that's listening. And that's the expected state. If I go look at the Big IP, this would be something like, a virtual server or a listener. It's not there yet. And we're going to put it in there here in just a little bit. So curl, right? I'm using a -K. Just get used to using curl. A lot of people use it as a check, right? I want to say, is this thing there? Give me back the payload. Give me back a health monitor page. Give me back something on the page. I can use that to verify that it exists. And that could be in actually a couple different mechanisms. So the reason why I love curl is because it's not just that one facet of the tool, right? It's not just, does something exist? You can use it to do all kinds of things. It's actually an interactive tool. I can send in a payload. I can actually send in headers. I can act as a browser. I can make it appear like I'm a user. And then I could expect something to come back, right, as another payload or some other capacity where I need to actually do transitional work from one box to another. And that's why I think understanding and using that in a couple different mechanisms, like if you are a Big IP user right now, go make your own custom health monitor, right? Understand, do a curl against a VIP, right, or a pool member, understand what the payload looks like to come back, write your own health monitor, put in some Git information, put in some header information, make it as defined as possible. And you're going to start to build up this, let's say, building block that lets you interact with other things. You're doing it as a health monitor in one capacity, but you're going to eventually use it as a mechanism to send things into an API or to get information out of a system, which is it's just a fun thing to do. So anyways, the first part is curl. It's not doing anything right now. This is actually the same box. So if I do, just so we can see that there's some stuff there, if I do it against the 8443 port, this is my Big IP. So this is the landing page in HTML of a Big IP. which I know it's up, so you can see that it's actually there, but the VIP that I want to listen on is not. So we're going to leave that as empty until we start to get into it. The CLI tools. The CLI tools of being on an instance is not as much fun as I think a CLI tool across multiple platforms. That's where things become a little bit more interesting. If I had to log into a big IP to make some changes, that's hard to automate, right? It's hard to say, you know, go into this device, do this command, make sure that something happened, and then tell this sub shell that I need to do something else. Like that's quite a bit of work. But if you look at, you know, public cloud providers or private cloud providers, or, you know, companies that have this nice transition period between where they are taking services and they're combining them all under an umbrella, like what Big IP is doing, where we have, you know, some stuff as public cloud, some stuff as on premises. As soon as a company starts to realize that they may have a mechanism or have a need for a mechanism that lets you interact across different things, you start to see things like SDKs or CLIs, like Azure's CLI or AWS's CLI or Google's. I can interact with that and I get to touch all kinds of things. It may just be a virtual server, or it may be or a server, or it may be a load balancer, or it may be a security policy, but I can touch all of those from one spot. And that's where you get to start to do that building block, right? I did some curl requests, so I know how to interact, right? And then I get into a CLI. And the one that I'll show you now is Big IPs. Technically it's not Big IPs. It's F5s. So it gets released as a pip install. It also comes as a container. And I've been doing a little bit in the container just because I don't have to deal with Python environments. And if you don't know what that is, that's fine. Just realize if you put it in a container, you can destroy the container and start over again, right, at some capacity later, and not have to worry about monkeying around with your machine and making it work to a certain degree. So this is going to launch. It does come right from Docker Hub, so it's going to pull down. It's got some nice variable mapping so that I can actually get my configuration into it. And then this is where it's going to come from, and it's going to drop me into a shell. So let's go ahead and make sure I actually copy that. I drop it in here, and we can see.
It saves a lot of frustrations when it's containerized like that.
Everything, right? Like I do a ton of demos, and just having a website in a container, right, or having a service in a container, like the one that I use pretty often is actually HashiCorp's console. They have a container-based structure that you can launch into Kubernetes. And from there, like I can use that system and destroy that system when I want, right? And then just launch it again using some kind of, let's say, mapped environment volumes that allows me to just take it down and bring it back up. And it's so nice not having to build around environments, right? To just use a service. So that's one, right? And I know we're not talking specifically about Docker, but I think it enables pretty much everyone. And you don't have to have a lot of knowledge to it. If you understand a VM, you get some nice information about that.
Question from Sebastian. John, are you doing any Terraform stuff for the virtual agility?
I am not. I took on, I know Sebastian, you work here, or at least we've interacted before. I took on quite a bit more Ansible than HashiCorp tools. And it's not that I don't like one over the other. It's just that fit with where I was working. So there is quite a bit of Terraform at virtual agility. I think probably Tony's class is the larger of them, but I think there's at least 3 that have some Terraform examples in it. So good plug though, if you want to get to do any of the Terraform Big IP provider work, it's free, right? Take virtual agility, register. I don't know how we put that link in here, but add it. Put that in here.
So for those who don't know Sebastian, he works with F5 a lot as he does professional services consulting independently. And we've had him talk to a lot of our customers about automation, and he does a lot of his work through automation as well.
Yeah, I think it's just a kind of an everyone thing at this point. Mm-hmm. And that's why I like those first 2 tools, is because they're independent of what always either feels like king of the hill or I don't know, a religious debate on which one is going to be better than the other one. And there are good use cases for all of them. I like all of the tools for what they do. And it's fun just to see them, but it's difficult, right? In deciding which one you're going to use. use the best one, right? Use the one that you like. You'll make it work if you like it. So
cool.
All right, back to this. I've launched the container and it's dropped me in the shell. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to log in to that big IP. So the way that the flow works, right? This is the F5 CLI. It's going to log in with an authentication provider of big IP against this host on this port. I'm doing a single NIC instance. That's why the port's on a funky number. And then the username is the username, right? So admin, let's go with this. And provided I can type, it'll let me log in. So I'm logged into the big IP at this point. Now I can interact with the big IP right from where I am. I don't have to go to it. I don't have to do anything else. If this was in some kind of CI process, right, I would kick this down in the process to be able to go send some configuration, which I'm going to do right now. Anyways, the first part I want to see is I'm going to interact with the declarative API on the big IP. So I need to make sure, right, that AS3 is installed. If it's not installed, that's fine. I don't have to deal with it, right? The CLI will handle it for me, which is fun. So I don't have to deal with this lifecycle management of what it is. So this is an extension check. So verify that it's there. And what we're going to find is it's not there, right? It's not installed, but the latest version is 3.19. So I don't need to do anything. I don't need to install it at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send in some declarations. So I'm going to first check for AS3, and then I'm going to check for telemetry streaming. And the reason I'm checking for both is because I'm going to actually take this blank big IP. I'm going to send in a list like configuration for L4, L7 services. I'm also going to send in configuration for Beacon, which is our SaaS offering. And then I can check Beacon from the same tool as well to see that everything's in there. So I don't have to go around, right? There's all of these weird, goofy steps in automation. If I don't have to deal with all of those steps, I'm more efficient, right? Like I'm saving a bunch of time doing this. Just to send one in, I'm going to send in the first one. Let's hope that this is actually sitting on that drive. It's going to sit, right? It's going to take a little bit. So what we're going to see right now is actually it's installing AS3. I didn't have to do it. Yeah, I agree. There is no bad choice. As long as you are progressing, and keep in mind progressing, and this is a good tangent while this is doing whatever it's doing. As long as you are progressing, you are making progress, right? That sounds like an obvious statement, but progressing in almost all capacities of automation means that you are also failing. So I wrote down all of these commands up here, right? That's because last night, I wanted to make sure that I had a good flow of what this would look like. There are, right, no typos in here. That's probably a good thing. But when I was working through it last night, there was typos, right? I was spelling extension wrong. I was looking for create instead of list, right? There was different things in here to look for. If I wanted to make sure that I was always perfect, I'm never going to progress at the rate as somebody that's going to learn something. So learn, fail, right, along the way. Use all the tools, right? Find one that you're going to like. It doesn't matter which one it is. It's just find one that you want to play with. All right. So this is done. We can actually see the declaration. I'm using a declaration, which anybody is welcome to use as well. But this is, I use this one for auto scaling when I do demos. So everything is pretty straightforward. When I get up to the top, you'll see it's got, actually, you won't see it there. The virtual address is a wildcard, meaning everything on the box will essentially listen for it, and it makes the whole declaration reusable. It also installed, it installed AS3 for me. I didn't have to do that. But now this thing is done, actually sitting in here. So if I wanted to, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to install the telemetry streaming one. And that'll kick me over configuration into Beacon. And then I'm going to switch the browser so we can actually see all the stuff that got built. So let's do the Beacon one as well. And that's going to take about the same amount of time. So while it's doing that, actually, let's wait. Let's chat for a little bit. While it's doing this, because I wanted to install telemetry, and then I want you to see the actual curl command again, because this is the way I would test something. I would make sure it's not there, right? I would run the commands that I want it to do, and then I would, at the end, check to make sure that something is actually there so that I could progress to be done with whatever this flow was. So now I'm going to check and see if I can curl again. And with all magic happening, I'm in the wrong box. Hold on, let's do this. There's a web page, right? So very fast. So let me scroll back up. But there's the curl command again, and now I'm getting a web page back. So I know that I'm done. And we've been doing this like 10 minutes, and I've been chatting for a little bit. But that's a good automation flow using just some regular tools, right? Without having to do too many complex things. And now placing it into an actual CI job, there are things you're going to have to do outside of this, right? And that's where those other providers become so valuable. Making sure that the big IP is there, that was magic to everybody on this call, right? But using Terraform to place that big IP in infrastructure in Azure, that's not magic for Terraform. But understanding how I got there, right? That's some good stuff that you can build your building blocks along with today. I'm going to stop sharing this because we're about done in here.
If we kind of unwind that too, how many clicks do you think that would have taken in the GUI to do everything that we just did there?
I don't know, 200 maybe, right? Like if it was a pool. So there's some magic inside this AS3 declaration here. I'll pull it up. It does a ton of stuff. If you haven't seen AS3, go read about it. But it's one declarative interface for me to interact with. So I'm using the CLI to send this payload in, but it's doing all kinds of stuff. It's creating a virtual server. It's creating a forwarding policy. It's creating persistency methods. It's doing an FQDN. So what you're not seeing here is that like we talked about just a little bit ago, I don't necessarily want to stand up infrastructure just for a demo. I want to use something that's ephemeral, like use a Docker container, use something that already exists that you don't have to create just for demoing structures or learning information. So what I'm doing in this part of it is I'm actually creating a pool that is nginx.org. So I don't have to create my own. And then I'm using a traffic policy to rewrite the header through the big IP to front nginx.org. Nice. So what you're seeing in this page that's being loaded down here is actually Nginx. Like many websites use like additional things, but it's actually Nginx's page. And then I place a WAF in front of it so that I can actually show WAF, right? So it has some security. So it's actually more secure than Nginx's page. And I don't have to do anything, right? As far as creating that infrastructure. I like to demo across things that I don't have to touch. So I get to use big IP tools to fake it. And I know that it's real world, don't fake people's websites. Like, keynote, but it's ours and it's easy and I'm not doing anything malicious. So it's just a fun way to build something out.
Cool. And
it makes you learn, right? Like, again, if I was doing a curl request to Nginx, it would actually fail. So let's do that. So like curl, say Nginx, by the way, doesn't have to Nginx. Actually, this will work. The reason it will work though is that it's going to give me a redirect. Hold on. The reason it'll work is because curl itself sends in the -h, right? The large H, that is the name of Nginx. So if you try to build like health monitors or try to build forwarding policies for sites that are listening for their name, like application names, it won't work. You have to put those things in there, which means that's, again, that like if you understand curl and you understand how you would interact with somebody, if I put in a -h of a funny name, let's see if I can do this. Hey, live stuff, right? .com, right? That should be giving me something wrong with the page. I don't know where it is. YouTube channel? Maybe not. All right. Live playing. But it shouldn't let me send in a host header that isn't its own host header. If it does, maybe I'm getting around it somehow. But just like understanding those little bits, that's why I think you need to learn those building blocks first. All right.
Comments here. Robin says, many of the labs are hydrated using Terraform.
Yes. Yeah, totally agree. Right. And it's to a different degree at different points. So you're seeing me interact with, a tool or big IP or products like Beacon from one spot, but Terraform has lots of different use cases. So some of the use cases are to hydrate the labs, right? To just bring them up. Some of them are to actually manage the state of configuration in the labs. So there's like lots of different places. Don't start with all of it, like ever. Don't just be like, today I'm going to automate like that. Tomorrow you'll have a headache. So don't go that far, but pick one thing, right? I want to do a VIP like I did in here, this example of just the CLI for AS3. I want to do one thing. I don't need to do a whole bunch of them. Just pick one, work your way up. So, but yes, a lot of the labs are hydrated. That's a good term.
Sebastian professing his love for Terraform still. Good.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I mean, but think about that, Sebastian. Before we had declarative onboarding, like as you're mentioning DO, how much work was that? Like I wrote labs that did onboarding before DO existed, and it was painful. And it wasn't painful that you couldn't automate it. It was painful in how you tested to make sure that it was working. You invest more time and let's say, I know this is a very lame example, but as time is money, right? You invest more time in testing at some degree via, old API mechanisms than you actually do creating features. Like at a certain point, the curve starts to break apart, and it's painful. So you probably love it more because of what's in place for you to be able to use. Let me stop sharing this one. Let's go to the other one. Application and big IP. I don't know what screen I'm sharing. Here we go. Cool. They're all hidden for me. There we go. All right. So this is that big IP that I was sending configuration into. You can see that same address up here. I'm going to refresh this, and this is what was on the box to begin with. Now we can see the AS3 and telemetry are installed. If I go look in virtual servers, they're all gone, but not really because they're up in a different partition. So there's the partition that was made, and there's those two VIPs that were created. So I've done a bunch of things to interact with this box. Now, it's understandable that you're going to come in here, but the fun capacity of it was I interacted with, right, looking to see if it was there. I interacted with one of those extensions, then the next extension, and that sub extension sent stuff over to Beacon. And now I can go into Beacon and we can actually see this instance that's sending information up to Beacon. So I'm getting stats and telemetry immediately. So I've got a bunch of stuff going on. But here's this box. I'll talk about the Terraform stuff in a second. I'm going to go into Portal so you can see this other instance. And I don't know, demo-y provided everything is working. I think Jill talked about Beacon last week, but I'm not going to go too deep into there. Let's look at not dashboards, configurations, sources. So there's my source, right? It's checking in now. It checks in every minute, but I sent in that telemetry one. It started sending information up into this big IP. And then from here, I can create things in Beacon also with that same CLI. But since I'm already in here, I don't need to jump around. If I went create, I could create an app. All right, it's a virtual. And then I'd have to find the one that I just made. I don't know where the names are. Somewhere in there, whatever. But I could actually get application data. So it would look like this guy. Application lists. Like this is one that's already sitting in here. If I click on this, somehow that's not right. Dashboard view. There's all kinds of options. Dashboard view, like it gives me some nice stats about how the box is handling. If I click on this one, show metrics. All right. I can get information immediately out of what I just deployed, all from one spot. So it's just, I think, yes, the end result is that you want something in the end, but getting all the way there, like if I wanted to automate, why do I want to automate, right? I want to automate so that I can stand up an instance, protect nginx.org in a short amount of time. Now, the automation for that could be handled in tons of different capacities. It could be, I'm going to use Terraform. It could be, I'm going to use curl. It could be, I'm going to use John's orchestration tool. And the tooling is less important as long as you understand why you're doing it go back and then find the tool that you're going to like to be able to manage, right, that flow. You saw one here. Super simplistic flow though. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about Terraform, because you could do a lot of what I just did in Terraform, but I chose to do it in the CLI because now when you execute Terraform, you still have to use those same kind of mechanisms. You still have to use some kind of provider, right? I was using the CLI. You're going to use the Terraform provider. You still have to have some kind of authentication method. And then what Terraform is doing for you, though, is it sets that configuration and then it gets something back. And you did all that in this kind of, let's say, manual automated process is what I was doing. But it allows you to be able to, build something, Terraform, get a response back, move on to the next item. So I could actually take all the stuff that we just did and use different Terraform providers. It's not likely you're going to use big IP provider for everything, right? You're going to use, a VMware provider or an Azure or an AWS provider to build or hydrate infrastructure. And then you're going to move in to that vendor provider to do those systems and services. So you're seeing what that would look like as a flow. I still did it all via an automated tool, but I didn't have to do it. I didn't have to understand quite to the degree of how I'm going to hand off to each one of those modules. Now, I get Terraform is not a handoff style solution without depends-ons, or dependencies, but it's still that same logic, right? I need all these things and it needs to look like this. What is it going to take for each one of those things to finish out to be able to get back to where I need it to be, right? Or to be where I want it to be. So there's a bunch in here. AS3, that's what you saw me work with, right? This is the AS3 provider. It gives you some examples of what it looks like down below. Here's an AS3 declaration. Like this one is significantly less complex than the one that I did. Again, start small and work your way up. But there's a bunch of stuff in here that you're going to touch. DO, like Sebastian mentioned, it's an incredibly powerful one. I can confidently tell you there isn't an equivalent for the DO one in Ansible. That just doesn't exist, right? Onboarding is nicer in a state tool like Terraform is. So use it here, right? If you don't do a lot of onboarding, then decide where you want to go. But yeah, so Terraform, again, I'll selfishly plug for agility or virtual agility, because there will be a bunch of labs that go over this stuff too.
Plug away.
Yeah. And it won't be my lab because I don't have it in there, but take Tony's class or Robin's class or Chaz's class. These are all names you don't know, but they're great instructors that like to share things that they've worked on. And almost everything in agility is driven by use cases from the field. And we're not just out there to create, concepts. These are things that people can take away from and reuse. So,
yeah. Registration for the labs for agility, I believe, will be opened up this week as well. So that's a bit of a teaser from John on some of the labs to look forward to. I know some of the ones I'm involved on are more APM focused, 15.0 features like identity access or identity aware proxy. Is a really cool lab done by Jason Wilburn, and I'll be a part of that. There's a WAF lab that I'm a part of as well, using the OWASP dashboard, which is a new feature in Advanced WAF 15.0. So lots of cool stuff to look forward to.
So that was, yeah, we did this all programmatically with the curl at the end, but just so that it wasn't actually faked, right? There's the actual address and it is Nginx.
Sure it is.
So it's just a fun way to play with it. And this is something that you could do again in your lab don't do it in production. Like that shouldn't have to be said, but do it in an environment, spend some time this week with a couple of different tools. And I think you'll come out of, I don't want to say quarantine, but self-isolation with a few more skills than you had coming out or going in, I should say.
I think what's cool about this too is is leveling up from a base level, like what you've just talked about so far, like learning curl and learning the CLI and then using Terraform to build a bunch of this stuff. gets you here. And then here, there's a whole, the rest of the world of F5 and the rest of the world of everything else is just so much easier because you've built everything from here. And then you can automate all the other higher level functions as well as you start to learn all these tools.
Yeah, exactly. And that's perfect. Like I think the building blocks make it worth it. Right. If somebody came to my desk, and I wasn't always this, right? Before I worked at F5, I was heavy into network operations. I was a net ops person for a long time. But if someone came to my desk and they were like, hey, I need you to automate something, I'm like, well, what? Why am I doing this? What's the value for me investing this time? And, spending a little bit, like a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow, you eventually get to that point where, yes, it's not just the big IP anymore. It's, your mentality has changed about how you can interact with tools and then also people. So,
yeah, awesome. You got anything else to go over, John, or is that all?
I think that's it. I mean, all of the things can be delved into for hours. So, I just wanted you to see a way to do it, right? Just a very quick deployment. But if you do ever want to see any of this stuff, we document all of it. The CLI documentation, the AS3 documentation, the Terraform stuff is all on Cloud Docs. You don't have to go to multiple spots. So go to one place and just read, right? There's lots of videos if you don't want to actually, read. although you should probably read it too.
Cool. So I am going to I've taken down some notes. I'm going to throw those into the description. So if you're watching YouTube right now, just by the end of the day, let's say, refresh the page. I'll throw in some notes to go along with this for links to the various things. There's a great article. I talked about it on the weekly update, but a great article or video, sorry, by Paul Deacon on using F5 CLI. And there's a new central article on that as well. There's some links to one of our colleagues, Eric Chen, did some great stuff, examples using Terraform to build out SSL VPN. So that's a great use case, very relevant right now, scaling VPN using Terraform. And then otherwise, I think the beginning of this stream actually got clipped off a bit because I didn't hit confirm. So a couple of things that I reviewed at the beginning that I will review now because it won't show up on the recording is if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. So it is over here. The channel art looks like that. Yeah, right below John. We have a couple things, recent live stream. So recent one with Jill Duran right underneath John over there. And then one right here, we had a weekly update with Ryan McElgan. So he covers Shape Security for Western Canada. We got to know him in a little bit. And then we'll actually have, hopefully, Jason Lang, who is also part of the Shape Security acquisition, speaking to us next week. And then right here, tomorrow, we have a live stream with Jeffrey Hayner. So that's a community edition live stream. So if you're following along with the different booze hours that are happening, community edition is less F5 and technical focused and more just community focused, having positive messages. Jeffrey Hayner has a really positive message. He's the co-owner of the gym that I go to. And right now, with us not being able to go to the gym, I think it's really important for us to look for ways to stay healthy and get your exercise in and making sure that you're eating right during quarantine. So Jeff will be able to share some of the tips that he has for you around that. And he's just got a really cool story. So he's an American who's actually immigrated up to Canada, but plays hockey even though he's from America. And he owns the gym that I go to and all the fun adventures around that. Otherwise, any of the stuff that you want to play with, most of it is free. For the eval key, though, just above John there's a QR code, or you can just email me directly. I've got a bunch of eval keys printed off. Just ping me and say, hey, can I grab an eval key? I'll just reply back with an eval key. I'm sure I'm going to get thousands of emails. So, just shoot me a one-liner and then I'll reply back with an eval key for you guys. Otherwise, thank you very much, John, for joining me on this live stream. I'm sure we're going to have you on in the near future to talk about more stuff. And John's been a key resource for myself and Daryl in the past while. We've had really strategic discussions with folks around automation strategies using their F5. So if that's a meeting that is of interest to you and you need to look at doing that inside of your environment, just let myself or Daryl know. Otherwise, any final words, John?
No, thanks for having me. This was fun. I've never seen all this magic. Like the links, the face, like it's pretty fascinating. I think you're doing an amazing job.
That's how good my Photoshop skills are at this point. I've watched like 2 YouTube videos and I can make this stuff.
You have an after school activity that you're doing really well at. So awesome. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks, John. Talk to everyone later.